Welcome to this online learning presentation for video editing for beginners, Microsoft Movie Maker. This is video 1 of 3. The aim of this content is for you to feel confident with Movie Maker to create effective and engaging videos for yourself. Now let's begin by taking a look at what we'll be covering in the entire course. So here's just a summary of the things we'll be covering across the 3 videos. First, we'll start with a checklist of what you'll need for this course. Then we'll look at the video ingredients that make up video editing. Then we'll look at how we create a new project with Microsoft Movie Maker. Then we'll start to get into the nitty-gritty of editing on the timeline, trimming clips, moving them around, adding titles. Once we've mastered editing on the timeline, we'll look at exporting your finished video and how to upload that to social media. We'll also look at some of the other software options available for beginner video editors. And lastly, we'll finish with some of my tips and tricks and favourite websites that I use while video editing. But I just want to start with this. There are a lot of statistics about the rise of video consumption. Stats like mobile video consumption rises by 100% every year. YouTube is the second most popular website after Google. You may have seen in the media statements from Facebook saying they believe their site will mostly be videos in the coming years. But I've chosen this quote on the screen because I think it explains the why of videos rise. Using video to connect with a prospect is so much more than a cold call. It humanizes the selling process. Also, I think what attracts people to video is that it's entertaining and engaging. People are busy, they don't have time to read a whole lot of text, so video is really great at summarizing key messages and getting them across quickly and effectively. So what are you going to need for this workshop? Well, you'll need the 3 supplied training videos. You're watching video 1 currently. You'll need the supplied PDF. I encourage you to print this out and scribble on your own notes. Ideally, you'll have some interview footage of yourself, which is simply just you talking to camera about your business or your training material. Then you will have some accompanying B-roll footage. These are just supporting shots that go along with what you are saying, so the viewer doesn't have to watch you talking to camera the whole time. It's a lot more interesting if you can show rather than tell. I've put landscape footage here. That is what Movie Maker is designed for. The alternative is some square footage or vertical footage, which has become more popular with Instagram and social media stories. But Movie Maker is landscape, and I've got a little link at the bottom of the PDF where you can go to read more about portrait versus landscape. But you ideally want footage that is 1920 by 1080. So next you'll see I've encouraged you to have an image with your logo. Most videos people are making are for business needs, so logos often feature. With Movie Maker, you can't just drop a logo on top of some footage like you can with other editing software, so you'll actually need to create an image that slots into your video. Music makes video interesting, so ideally you'll have a music track to accompany your visuals, ideally royalty-free or a licensed music track. And then I've just said to allow yourself 3 to 4 hours in total to chip away at this. Great thing about doing an online course is that you can do it at your own pace whenever it fits your life. But overall, if I was doing this in a person-to-person workshop, it would take up to 4 hours with questions. So video ingredients. I thought I'd start with this because it's a good habit to get into. Especially when you start to make more videos, things can get messy fast and you can lose assets quickly. So this is an easy file structure to have for each project. When you use advanced editing software, if you move an asset from the original location, you can actually break the link to the timeline where you're editing. and then you'll have an error message which says media is missing. So it's good practice to save everything into a folder rather than somewhere like your desktop where it is likely to be moved or deleted. So the first key ingredient is footage. So this is obviously video footage and clips, but it could also be any stills or photos that you would like to include as visuals. The next key ingredient is audio. Now for a lot of what you'll be doing, your audio will likely be synced to your footage. But if you have non-synced audio such as that recorded on a microphone or perhaps a voiceover, this is the place to save it. This will also be where you put any music or music licenses, as well as any sound effects. Lastly, graphics. This is where you should save any logos or brand guidelines that you have. And once you get more advanced, you can start to save special effects or external titles that you may purchase. Now let's jump into our first activity. With that knowledge, I'd like you to file your own video assets into a folder on your desktop with footage, audio and graphics. Now we're going to look at how to create a new project with Microsoft Movie Maker. For this section, I would like you to watch what I do, and then I will ask you to try it yourself. I encourage you to make notes on your handout as we go. So now we have filed our assets, we can open the software. With Microsoft, we go to the Start menu and we would scroll alphabetically, or if you've recently used it like I have, you would just click on it here. Otherwise, you may have it down in your bottom timeline if you've also used it before. So here we are in Movie Maker. To save a new project, we go up to File, click Save Project, then locate a file that you want to save it into. I'm going to save it in with where my footage is saved. So I'm going to then name my project. I'm going to call it Workshop. I'm going to save that. And now up here, this is called Workshop Movie Maker. So then when I have a number of projects, I'll be able to identify the one that I want to work with. If we go back up into File, you can see you can choose from recent projects. So if I close out of here, I could always come back and click on Workshop to open this project. Now the key thing you want to do is obviously add some of your media assets that you've just filed. To do that, we use the Add Video and Photos button. You can also do that from here. We'll go up to here and we just locate where we've filed our footage. So ours is in here. So this is where it's really handy that we have already filed our footage and it's nicely organized. So I can just highlight all of the clips that I want and go open. Alternatively, I can highlight a couple, but we want everything. So let's just go like this and open. And voila, now we see it is in Movie Maker. It may take a little bit of time to bring in or load the visuals. So this is what you'll be working with. Okay, so now it's time for another activity. Now I want you to open your Movie Maker and save a project like I just did. And then from your filed assets, I want you to add in all your footage that you filed earlier. Great, so now you've got your footage in Movie Maker. Let's get familiar with the Movie Maker user interface. But before I do that, I just want to show you something here. This is what we call a traditional editing timeline. So normally you would have all the visuals on the top half and all the audio on the bottom half, and obviously the video plays like this. So as we move along, we'll see that visual and that audio will play. The Movie Maker timeline is a lot simpler than that. You can see here it doesn't have this structure. But let's jump into Movie Maker and take a closer look. Okay, so here we are in Movie Maker. We have our timeline, and as I mentioned, it's a simplified timeline. So let's just add some music to show you what happens when you have your visuals and your audio. So I'm going to go up here to add music, and I want to locate my music track that I filed earlier, so it's in that audio folder. So let's bring this in, and now you can see that the music track's been added onto the timeline where my playhead was sitting. That's the simplified version of a timeline that you'll be working with for Movie Maker. It'll make more sense as we go along. But just some of the other limitations with Movie Maker, so like in that example I showed you before, you saw that there was visuals stacked on top of one another. You can't do that in Movie Maker. Basically, you can only have one visual at the time, which means you can't put, if I wanted to put a logo on top of this shot, I can't do that. I could put a logo before and after it, but I can't stack it on top. The other limitation that I have in Movie Maker is that I don't get many audio tracks. You can have 2, possibly 3, depending what version you're running. Whereas in advanced editing software, you can have pretty much as many as you want sometimes. Another thing that is missing from Movie Maker that you would see in some of the other editing software is what we call a bin. So you usually have an area over to the left where all these clips that you're working with also show, and the bin allows you to sort of add clips one at a time and work that sort of way, rather than everything being on the timeline and you having to move everything around on the timeline. But you know, Movie Maker is free and it still has lots of great things that you can do with it, and you can create a basic video no problem. So let's keep moving around the user interface to see what else there is. And while I do that, I encourage you to make notes on your handout so that you can remember everything I'm discussing. So over here on the left is the playback monitor, or sometimes it's referred to as the preview screen. Basically, this is what your final video is going to look like based on what you do here on the timeline. So as I scroll, you move this playhead here through the timeline, I can see my video on the left and how it will appear. Obviously at the moment it looks very rough because this is all raw footage. Now as you saw me moving this playhead, you also saw this little dot moving. I can scroll through the timeline in the preview this way also. Likewise, I can press play, so you can hear that music track playing with that visual because it's appearing at the same time. I can do rewind and fast forward, or I can simply press the spacebar to begin playing. Now up here we see the duration times, which are quite important. So this is showing me where my playhead currently is sitting. Here and here I'm at 1 minute and 5 seconds, and the second time here is the overall duration of the video. So that is quite important, this figure here, because if you are creating a video for a specific time, say you want a 15-second or a 30-second video, you obviously want to keep the duration to that time. So don't get confused about having lots of footage. Remember, you want to be cutting out as much as possible to get the most interesting videos. So you'll be wanting to keep an eye on that time and making changes to meet that time. So moving up to the top, we see a lot of options up here. So up here I can copy and paste, and now I have a duplicate of that piece of footage. I don't actually often do duplicates in videos. It's quite unusual to have something showing twice, unless it's sort of a special look or effect that you're going for. But that option is there quite handy with titles, possibly if you want to have a title with the same look. Earlier we looked at these sections here where we added the footage, and we use this to add the music. We've got some other areas over here where we can add additional things like titles and captions, and we'll go through these in a bit more detail later. Here, just going to stop that. This section here is some templates. So if you click on any of these, your timeline will change to become like that template. These are good if you're really beginner and you want some guidance on how to create your video. However, I encourage you to do your own custom version, because you can basically do what you want. So I would just keep it on the first one of this. And so it's taking us back to what we had earlier. Over here it gives me the option to rotate clips if I need to. This is usually really handy when you've put in still photos. Sometimes they can be around the wrong way. And there is an option to remove. So I'm going to have one of these clips. They're duplicated, and remove it because I only want one. Over here on the far right we get into where we start to share videos towards the end. Again, I can save my movie as I'm editing. I encourage you to save as you go along. And we also have up here places where we'll talk about later, where we've got animations, visual effects, starting to get into some of the visual changes. Up here in the project tab, there's a really important option here to do with the size of your video. So I encourage you to do widescreen. That is what most videos are, 16:9. And ideally your footage will be 16:9 footage, which is 1920 by 1080 generally. So keep it widescreen if you can, unless you know a bit about footage and you know your footage is actually 4:3, but keep it 16:9. There's a couple of other audio options which we'll go through a bit later. View is a handy tab. So at the moment I've got waveforms showing. If I take them off, I can't see the waveforms, but if I click on it you can see where there's actually audio attached to a visual. So this clip has audio, this clip has audio, obviously our music is audio. So I usually work with that on. Thumbnail size is also really handy. You can make it a lot smaller. If you've got a lot of footage going on, that would probably be a good idea, but I like to keep it quite large. You can also zoom in, zoom out, etc. Then as you add more things to your timeline, you will get additional tabs. So I've got visuals on my timeline, so I get this video tools one. I've got music, and then later when I have a narration or some titles, I'll also get additional tabs, and these give me additional options which we'll talk through as we go through each of those sort of additions that you can make. Lastly, up the top we have, your home, you've got your save button, maximize your screen, always very handy undo button. And then because we are working in Microsoft, we can't forget the right click option. So I right click on my mouse, you get a couple of options also. Great, so that was the Microsoft Movie Maker user interface. Now I want you to spend some time exploring it yourself, clicking on some of the options and seeing what they do, what's available. And then when you are ready, I want you to import your music and your logo that you filed earlier so that you have everything in your project ready for the next steps.